You're all most welcome here tonight to share with us the celebration of 50 years since our inception. Tonight we are honouring the cause of liberty, embodied in our principles, namely free markets, private property, rule of law, free speech and individual liberty, the foundation of all successful states. You, our guests, our colleagues and associates, are all VIPs. You are our multipliers of ideas, fellow lovers of freedom, or in modern jargon, and there's not too many youngsters here tonight, our influencers. The program tonight is we're going to firstly hear some brief presentations providing insight into our history, our people, and our work. Then we will show a short video to fill in some of the gaps. And finally, our CEO, David Ansara, will provide us with information on our current and future projects. Before we begin, though, I would like to express our gratitude to our sponsors for supporting this event. Firstly, to Charles Heidenrich from the Adult Education Network. Charles, I don't know where you are. Mike Brown from ETFSA. Mike, thank you. Not right now, no. Dr. Brian Benfield, long-time benefactor. And Neil Emmerich, likewise generous long-time sponsor. Thank you all for your assistance in making this event possible, and to all of you for supporting and sharing this milestone. We're now going to kick off with our first speaker, Mark Oppenheimer. Mark is a Johannesburg bar advocate and a philosophy podcaster. Mark.
So I've always thought that the FMF is well suited to stand up for the voiceless, although unfortunately tonight, as you'll hear, I'm one of those voiceless. I thought I'd be silenced by some communist revolutionary, but it turns out that it's the Pollens. So my short little speech tonight will be about why NGOs matter and why the FMF in particular matters. And if you think about the many difficult conversations that we have in South Africa, it's often those small voices that are able to make big changes and put out ideas that are very unpopular. There are very few organizations that stand up for free speech, for free markets, for freedom of association, and I'm proud to say that the FMF has been at the forefront of that fight for 50 years. It has had its struggles, its ups and downs. I think there was a moment in time when many of us thought that it would have perished. A few years ago, David and I had a long walk where he said to me, I've been asked to lead this organization and I'm quite worried that it's a sinking ship. And I said to him, David, it is a ship that has sunk, and your job is to try and resurrect it, which he has done so gloriously. And it is... It's wonderful to see so many friends here tonight who have played an important role in fighting for liberty. One of the things that David has done so well is to form ties with organizations that are co-partners in that fight. So if I think about Piet Leroux from Sakeliga, those two organizations have just grown stronger and stronger over the years. We've fought together in the trenches of court, at the Constitutional Court. We've fought for economic freedom. We've fought the fight for non-racialism to ensure that regardless of the color of your skin, you should be able to participate in the marketplace. And that fight continues with other organizations that are here tonight, with Solidarity Movement, with AfriForum, and with those that care about freedom. So I want to say I wish you another 50 years of fighting for liberty, and I'm sure we will have many more victories under our belt quite soon.
So now that you've heard the importance of think tanks in our socio-political and economic sphere, I'd like to take a moment to tell you a bit more about the FMF. We're a very small organization with a big impact. At the hub of our organization is our full-time employed staff. I think you'd all be amazed at how few they are. Firstly, I would like to honor Judith Kosana, our operations officer, who joined the FMF in April 1995. Hold your applause. She has been with us 30 years. more than half her life and more than half of our life. She is the frontline interface of our organization, and Gail tells me she stays calm under pressure. We thank her for her commitment and steadfast loyalty over these many years. Judith is here with her husband and children tonight. Judith, I'd like you to stand up. Thank you. Glynis O'Connor, our accounts manager, joined us in June 2013. And I can't see you now, you're hiding behind the camera. Thank you, Glynis, for taking such good care of our books. Sekeli Temba, our policy officer, joined in January 2022. Monica Hlongwani, our operations assistant, likewise joined us in January 2022. Ayanda Zulu joined us in March this year as our intern. I will say more about the others, Gail Day, Martin van Staden, and David Ansara, when I introduce them. Although the hub is small, it is reinforced by the multiple spokes of the wheel emanating from the center. The spokes are the many directors, associates, and contributing authors who expand our work and our reach, and without whom we would be only a fraction as effective. Our strong wheel enables us to travel far, often over rough terrain. Each project, whether health or rule of law, has numerous part-time contributors, many of whom give their time and expertise freely, and to whom we are deeply indebted. Thank you, many of whom are in this room tonight. Next, I would like to introduce board member Wilhelm Hertzog. Wilhelm studied law and accounting at the Universities of Cape Town and Stellenbosch. In 2017, he co-founded the investment management firm Rosendahl Partners. Wilhelm has served on the FMF's board since 2017, and he tells me that in a household of 5 humans and 2 animals, he is the only male. Lucky Wilhelm.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Gail. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow libertarians, it is a great pleasure and privilege to stand before you today. It is of particular significance for me personally because my family and I have had a long association with the FMF. It is immensely gratifying to be witness to the 50th Jubilee of the organization. It is also, however, immensely intimidating to stand before you today. To be clear, this is no reflection on you as audience as much as it is an august audience I'm addressing. The intimidation stems rather from the stature of the individuals I've been asked to talk about. These individuals are 4 past presidents or chairpersons of the FMF. They are men who left indelible footprints on the organization. In their own way and in their own time, they all contributed immensely to steering the FMF to be the enduring organization that it is. And here I must add that whilst the terms of service of the individuals below do follow each other chronologically, they were not necessarily the only office bearers of significance in the organization during their respective times with the FMF. A conclusive list of preeminent office bearers will keep us busy for the entire evening, and I'm under strict instructions to limit my discussion to 8 minutes. So unfortunately, we've had to be selective, and I apologize in advance if this causes any offense. The first of the 4 individuals I'm mentioning tonight is Dirk Hertzog. And yes, the surname I share with him is no coincidence. I am indeed his grandson. Dirk was not the founder of the FMF, though he did describe himself as being an accomplice to the construction of the organization. He was instrumental in canvassing support for the organization from the business community. He was Anton Rupert's understudy in the founding of Rembrandt, and to this day, the offshoots of Rembrandt are some of the FMF's most generous supporters. Dirk was a raconteur with an incisive wit and a unique ability to distill human behavior down to its core motivations. In his own words, in Afrikaans, these motivations typically come down to vreet, vry en vrek. I could not quite capture this crude but very descriptive alliteration into an English translation, but directly translated it means eating, procreating and dying. Dirk himself passed away in 1991 on the day of his 77th birthday. but he left behind several speeches and a publication entitled Rooi Mure, Sê Goed, a bundle of aphorisms sprouting from a unique and quirky mind. Dirk was succeeded by Michael O'Dowd. Michael is the only one of the four gentlemen I'm talking about who I never had the privilege of meeting in person. That seems to be a real pity, because from what I've learnt about him, he was a giant of a man in the breadth of his talents and his impact on the FMF, business and society. From speeches in his honour and thought pieces emanating from his pen, the prodigious intellect of the man is clear. In addition to achieving most of his academic qualifications at the highest levels of distinction, he was the author of academic papers published in journals of both economics and science. He was bestowed no less than 3 honorary doctorates from the universities of Natal, the Witwatersrand and Rhodes. He was indeed, as Martin van Staden once described him, a great classical liberal polymath. O'Dowd served as an executive director of Anglo-American and as chair of the Anglo-American Chairman's Fund. The latter is often cited as the first major corporate social investment initiative in South Africa. His tenure as chair of the FMF stretched from 1978 to his passing in 2006. No man serves in office for such a span of time without leaving behind an immense contribution to the organization which he served. The gentleman who had to fill the enormous shoes left behind by Michael O'Dowd is in the audience here today, as you saw earlier. He's most often introduced today as a retired professor in insurance and risk management, but he was also a founder and chairman of pioneering direct insurance business Clientele, and he has remained actively involved in entrepreneurial ventures in the South African insurance industry to this day. Of the 4 individuals I speak of tonight, I suspect Brian Benfield's time as chairman of the FMF's executive committee must have been, on a personal level, the most difficult. His relationship with erstwhile executive director of the FMF, Leon Lowe, was a close one. Towards the end of Brian's service as chair, the relationship between Leon Lowe and the FMF broke down irretrievably. The way in which Brian dealt with these most trying of circumstances and the way in which his support for the FMF never wavered is something for which we all owe him a deep debt of gratitude. We're privileged to have We are privileged to have Brian continuing to serve as a board member of the FMF, and we honour and thank him for his immeasurable support over more than 2 decades. It required a person of great fortitude to pick up the baton from Brian as chair of the FMF board in 2020. And great fortitude is what the FMF found when Rex van Schalkwyk was elected chair following a most chaotic annual general meeting in July 2020. Like his forebears, Rex was a man of many talents. He served as judge in the Transvaal Provincial Division of the Supreme Court, but was also the author of 3 books, one of which, interestingly enough, was a novel. He first became actively involved in the FMF as an advisor on the rule of law, and subsequently served as chair of the Rule of Law Project. I had the privilege of serving on the FMF board for the full duration of Rex's chairmanship, which concluded with his recent passing. In his first year of service, he stood as a fortress against the onslaught of challenges which may well have led to the demise of the Free Market Foundation. Our gathering here tonight, the fact that the FMF has endured, bears testament to the character of Rex van Schalkwyk. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to the end of my contribution to this evening. As you can see, the FMF stands on the shoulders of giants. We have been led by some remarkable people, all of whom played a part in building an organization that has contributed to the betterment of South Africa for 50 years. To our current chair, Gail, fortunately or unfortunately, you have a great deal to live up to. But be assured that everyone in this room has no doubt that come the 100th Jubilee of the FMF, you will be mentioned in the same breath as those who came before you. Here's to the next 50 years. Thank you very much.
Brian Benfield has for decades acted as a mentor and friend to the FMF, as Wilhelm has told you. He is a retired professor from the Department of Economics at the University of the Witwatersrand. Brian has been a board member since 2023, and he tells me he loves to take his wife on cruise holidays. Brian.
notice, Gail, you didn't tell them the rest that I told you. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and to our guests and distinguished colleagues, friends and fellow warriors of the long battle we have fought for the emancipation of our country and its peoples. There was a time, in fact, when we thought we'd won, around about 94, 95, and people were saying, we really need to go on. Well, little did we know what was still ahead, that there was much worse conditions. When I first became involved with the Free Market Foundation, it was actually about 40 years ago, it was just prior to the 1994 transition. And we actually thought at the time that it's possible that the journalists who were asking us, should we give up on the FMF? I mean, after all, we now have the best constitution in the world, and it's free, and the people who are coming into power are freedom fighters. We shouldn't be needed anymore. Well, little did we know that the trouble we faced when this organization was formed in 1975 was nothing compared to what we face today. But it's a singular privilege to stand here this evening as we celebrate the milestone that few institutions ever reach. Half a century, 50 years of the Free Market Foundation, who can believe it? That's long enough, I'm told, for a marriage to qualify as golden. But unlike most marriages, though, the FMF has not survived on compromise. It survived on a stubborn refusal to give in. In 1975, the foundation was established on a simple but profound conviction, and some of us may repeat a few things this evening. We didn't check what each was going to say, but I hope that most of what we will say bears repeating, ladies and gentlemen. The conviction was that liberty is not an abstraction. The unfettered voluntary exchange, any unfettered voluntary exchange, is not merely a nice to have. And the rule of law is not just a technicality, often confused, by the way, by our media, is the rule of law and order. If they say there's a riot going on outside, we need to get it under control, that's law and order. That's not the rule of law. The rule of law, as Martin will tell you, because he's written an entire wonderful volume on it, with his professor and with Rex, who's unfortunately no longer with us, an entire volume written on the concept of the rule of law, which in short for a simple man like me means the opposite of the rule of man. So together and grounded in the secure property rights, these truths form the bedrock of a just, prosperous and flourishing society. For property, ladies and gentlemen, and many people don't realize this, it's not some sort of privilege that's to be granted by the state. It is the very foundation of human dignity. Without the right to own, to keep, and to trade freely in all kinds of assets and services, there can be no genuine liberty. I mean, I've often used the example of if you live on land owned by the Ngumnyama Trust, first of all, you don't own that land. You live there at the behest or the pleasure of the sole trustee of the Ngumnyama Trust, the king of the Zulus. And if you show him the finger, I'm not going to do that now, but if you show him the finger and tell him you despise his views, how long do you think you're going to be permitted to live there? Whether you're a Zulu or not, you're not going to live on that land anymore. And so unless you own your own property, you have no freedom, because you cannot express your own view anywhere if you don't own your property. I know it's an unusual concept on the continent of Africa, but we have to understand, without it, none of us have freedom. Secure property is the shield that allows a citizen to stand tall without any dependence on political favor. Unless our property rights are secure, we dare not show the finger to a politician, as I say, not even express our views openly. Only secure property rights can bring true freedom. From its inception, the FMF's mission was urgent, but it was never fashionable. In an age of status dogma, we spoke then, as we do today, of freedom. At a time of racial exclusion then, we spoke as we do today of inclusion. When power was centralized, we proclaimed that growth and transformation come not from central planning or central command, but from building widely dispersed choice. Tonight, my task is to honor 5 extraordinary individuals whose vision and persistence have carried our mission across generations. Of course, in the few minutes available to me, and I'm told I'm not allowed to speak for more than 6 minutes, I think it is, 8, okay, good. I can't possibly do justice to each of them. And knowing them as I do, their natural humility would probably prefer that I said nothing about them at all. However, since that would make for a very short speech, and since I have the microphone right now, I'll continue. We begin, of course, with Eustace Davey, whose health regrettably prevents him from being with us this evening. Quiet strength of the FMF since 1977, always gentlemanly. Those of you who remember Eustace and know him, always gentlemanly, unshakably principled. He gave this organization stability, continuity, and moral compass. He championed labor reform, pioneering the award-winning job seekers exemption certificate, which our government has not yet had the internal fortitude to introduce, job seekers exemption certificate, and reminded us tirelessly as he did that freedom works. His famous 1 million rand challenge kept the FMF strong in rather lean times. Not that we're going through anything other than lean times right now, I can assure you. And through it all, he taught us that persistence with integrity is not merely a tactic. It is, in fact, a legacy, and he leaves that legacy. We also, ladies and gentlemen, remember this evening Leon Lowe, the FMF's pioneering voice, and for decades its most well-recognized public face. His role in securing property rights in our Constitution cannot be overstated. Without his constant cajoling, we might never have had a property rights clause in our Constitution. It was an afterthought. You may remember, those of you who were around at the time. The property rights clause was the very last one to be written into the draft Constitution at the time. Rolf Meyer and his colleagues, I'm afraid, hadn't even thought of it, really, until Leon sent one message after another demanding that it be included in the negotiation. If it weren't for him, ladies and gentlemen, I honestly believe we would not have had a property rights clause in our Constitution, which might have saved, yes, might have saved the ANC a lot of trouble, I guess, at this stage. In addition, Leon's Kaya Lam project idea has brought thousands the dignity of freehold title. His battle against exchange controls, something that's never discussed, which surprises me, reminds us of how destructively costly that idea has cost our nation since 1961, when we emulated the Nazis by introducing the only idea of foreign exchange control that was around at the time, which was the Nazi idea. And we still have it. It's unbelievable that we still have it. And it's costing this country a fortune. I mean, not a fortune, immeasurable. Nonetheless, indeed, Leon's impact on South Africa and the FMF was profound and can never be forgotten. Alongside him, Temba Nolutshungu. Temba stands as one of FMF's most eloquent voices. His journey from black consciousness activist and MK cadre to classical liberal thinker speaks of rare courage. He's worked with members of parliament and community leaders across the country to secure property rights and to dismantle suffocating red tape. And he reminds us with persistence and volume that national prosperity without true liberty is quite impossible. In 2004, Jason Urbach joined us, sent to us by his admiring professor, Professor Adrian Saville, quite possibly the best piece of homework that Professor Saville ever marked. Jason defended intellectual property, resisted centralization in healthcare, and championed entrepreneurs who flourish when government steps aside. Though he has since moved on from the Free Market Foundation to greater and greener pastures, his support and his voice remain with us, especially in the NHI debate, which remarkably still goes on, where he is an expert and a national asset. Thank you, Jason. We hope you win that battle against the NHI, National Health Insurance. Last but by no means, yes, thank you. Well earned and deserved. Last but by no means least, Terry Markman, without whose inexhaustible fundraising efforts in the early days of the FMF might never have survived. I'm told that on one occasion he spoke to Leon and he said to him, "Leon, I don't think we're going to be able to pay salaries at the end of this month." Leon blinked and turned on his heel and never asked again how come the salaries were paid that month. And so Terry really looked after the organization financially for many years and kept us going, and for which we are very grateful. Every organization needs a tenacious Terry Markman to keep the center holding and quite literally to keep the lights on. Today, Terry drives Kaialam forward, where every title deed delivered is liberty restored, dignity affirmed, and inclusion made real, something that this government finds difficulty to do. We offer these men our profound admiration, ladies and gentlemen, and our gratitude. But do remember, gentlemen, as Zach de Beer once said at a donors' dinner, that the definition of gratitude is the lively anticipation of favors to follow. And so, through 50 years of perseverance, the FMF has been the voice of the conscience of the nation, showing all that the principles of liberty must and will endure. We've shown, too, that the rule of law is not just a slogan. Section 1 of our Constitution says it right at the very beginning. The Republic is founded on the supremacy of the Constitution and the rule of law. We could actually leave out everything else and just say, and the rule of law, critical to the entire Constitution. For all of us, this is not a constitutional imperative only. It is a safeguard against that tyranny and that would otherwise make our freedom non-durable. It makes our freedom durable, the rule of law. The Free Market Foundation held fast to these truths when they were unfashionable, inconvenient, and even unwelcome in Parliament, in the media, and dare I say it, in polite company. I was often shut up over dinner tables, sprouting on about what the Free Market Foundation stands for. Nonetheless, it's back in fashion, I think. It has endured apartheid, transition, state capture, climate change, even a pandemic, and occasionally the odd journalist asking naively whether we really need to exist at all. We endure, ladies and gentlemen, not because the work is easy, but because it matters. It matters as much today as it always has and always will. Half a century later, the truth proclaimed in 1975 remain more urgent than ever. The world is caught up in far more tangled red tape today than ever before, exported largely by unelected European Union bureaucrats, British civil servants, and dare I say it, American Democrats. Nonetheless, the tide is turning, and the voice of the FMF rings loud in the ears of many who did not want to hear it originally. This celebration, then, ladies and gentlemen, is not only a commemoration of longevity, it is a renewal of purpose. We honor the founders who stood against the tide, the directors who stayed the course, the staff who turned ideas into action, the donors who believed, then as now, sometimes in the face of the most ferocious opposition. This is our charge, then, to carry forward the cause of free markets and individual liberty with the same rigor, vigor, courage, and civility that has defined the FMF for 50 years. Unlike those ranged against us, our aim is to open people's eyes, not to poke them out. And so, ladies and gentlemen, as we look to the next 50 years, let us resolve that the voice of the FMF shall remain principled, persuasive, and loud. I thank you.
Gail Day, the FMF's head of operations, tells me she is a co-holder of a 1973 Guinness World Record. And yes, she has the certificate to prove it. Gail also loves cycle touring. Gail?
Leon Lowe and Francis Kendall wrote South Africa the Solution in 1986. It became a bestseller, garnering unexpected praise, including from Winnie Mandela, who wrote, "Here lies the drug to coagulate the blood of the bleeding nation." My dad and Francis's sister, Judith, met when Judith was just 20 and remained close friends for almost 60 years. It was because Judith gave my dad a copy of The Solution that I found it on a bookshelf on a visit home between teaching stints in Japan and took it back to Kyoto with me. I read The Solution on New Year's Eve, 1986, and resolved to come home and do something. That same night, I made a list of 16 things to do, beginning with see Leon and Francis, and including form some sort of action group. 3 months later, in March 1987, Time magazine documented the creation of a political action movement dubbed Groundswell. They didn't know it yet, but I knew then exactly who I would be working for when my teaching contract ended. I arrived home on Friday, May the 15th. The next morning, Judith put me in touch with Francis, who invited me to a Groundswell meeting she and Leon were attending that same afternoon. At that meeting, the authors offered me a temporary job while they were away in the States. Aside from dealing with book orders during my 5 weeks in the Lowe Kendall household, I chauffeured the Lowe daughters to school and ballet and pajama parties. After one play date, the mother handed 4-year-old Katie back to me in a huff. She had spanked her own daughter, and Katie had reprimanded her, saying, "We don't have hidings in our house. We have property rights." Initially for Groundswell, I stuffed envelopes and licked stamps. But I had this idea of influencing the discourse through solution parties based on home-hosted Tupperware parties. Tupperware parties were a revolutionary approach to direct sales, transforming the way household products were sold. The system was ingenious because it combined social interaction with a sales pitch in a low-pressure environment. Finding party hosts begins with family and friends. My mom hosted the first solution party on the 17th of October, 1987. With Nancy Sejas, a young American who had come out to work for Groundswell and the FMF, I presented the Canton system to a group of 8. Stuart Clark hosted the third party, Charles Haydenrich the 27th, Gabri Rigotti the 39th. An essential component of any party is to persuade 1 or 2 of the guests to host another party, snowballing your reach. I addressed a Rotary Club in the Northern Cape where the stakes were bigger than the plates and the men so angry that I was afraid. At an after-dinner presentation to Rotaract, while 1 or 2 young men remained sober enough to ask me questions, the other 30 or so stripped to their underwear and had a tug of war. For party number 200, the Songongo family filled their Bethlehem home with 28 guests, who kept me on my feet for 5 hours. I engaged with revolutionaries in Soweto. Seated on kindergarten chairs in an empty school, they talked of necklacing political opponents. By 1992, I had presented at 480 solution parties. Groundswell also hosted regular seminars, such as Redistributing Wealth, Not Poverty, Federalism Making It Work, and the Great Debate. The 2-day debate, held exactly 1 year before the 1994 election, comprised 10 topics, each presented by someone from Groundswell and someone from the ANC, the latter including Zola Skweyiya and Albie Sachs. The debate aimed to show that different views can and should be heard, and that in exploring these, common ground can be found. Our Stand Tall series of seminars grew out of audience interaction at the redistribution event. A certain Paul and Thuli said we needed to reach township residents and offered to corral 150 to the first engagement. Jeremy Ratcliffe of Marion Roberts immediately offered to finance the proposed seminar, and Stand Tall was born. Paul told us, if you feed them, they will come. So we fed their bodies and their minds, filling many a community hall. We handed out feedback forms to gauge our impact. My favorite comment in response to a presentation by me, she's sitting in the shade of a tree of perfection. By 1991, Groundswell began to focus on democracy training and later voter education. Both Theresa Emmerich and I did presentations to company and factory employees, and I paid several visits to schools in KZN, thanks to Lynn Oakley, curator of the Ashawe Museum. Lynn would arrange a series of presentations for me, and I would drive down in my old car and debate with youngsters about democracy and voting. I would ask matric students whether opposition parties would be allowed in a democracy and would get an unequivocal no. I would ask about minority rights and would be denied these. I would ask if the majority could get anything they voted for and would get an unequivocal yes. I would ask if this included chopping off the left ears of the minority. Yes. How about killing the oldest boy babies of the minority? Usually at this point I would get a no. Then I would get my ears back, then opposition parties, and then we could talk about a Bill of Rights. I would travel to KZN with my adored cat, Gamble. Gamble loved the car and would run to the flat door when I rattled my car keys. He went with me everywhere, including to the schools, lying on the back on the back dash, swatting a bobbin on a string. When I drove into a schoolyard, my car would be inundated with kids calling out, "Ikat, Ikat." I would leave the car door open and a bowl of water nearby, and Gamble would entertain himself until my return. When I left an hour or so later, the kids would call out, "E-democracy." So, I have been associated with the FMF, sometimes peripherally, sometimes intimately, since 1987. I have taken a one-year sabbatical. I have retired, not once, but twice, yet here I am still. As David Ansara says, the FMF is like the Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. I suspect that is true for many of us. Thank you.
Yes, a core member of the hub of the Free Market Foundation. We're now going to introduce you to another fellow board member, Temba Nolutshungu, who is also co-president of the FMF with Eustace Davey, who Brian mentioned earlier, one of the pioneers of the Black consciousness movement. His inevitable collision with the apartheid state saw him traverse the ideological spectrum, from an inveterate communist to an advocate of classical liberalism. Temba joined free market training in 1981 and subsequently managed our parliamentary liaison office in Cape Town. Temba.
Nelson Mandela was released from Victor Verster prison on the 11th of February 1990, marking the beginning of the end of apartheid. By 1991, South Africa was at the negotiating table. On the 27th of April 1994, we went to the polls under an interim constitution. The interim constitution included 34 constitutional principles with which the final constitution had to comply. When Parliament convened for the first time as the Constitutional Assembly in 1994, chaired by Cyril Ramaphosa, the voice of classical liberalism was sorely needed in the drafting of the Constitution. The Assembly began a process of public participation, which opened the door to intensive lobbying by the FMF. My colleagues and I passionately embraced the very real possibility of helping replace the immoral and discredited system of apartheid with something that would ensure growth, freedom, and peace for all. And so the FMF's Project Transition was born to ensure South Africa had the best possible constitution. At a series of in-house workshops, my colleagues and I strategized what to advocate for and how best to go about doing so. We asked ourselves, if we could achieve one thing only, what would that be? The answer was the protection of private property rights. While not an exclusive focus, this became a primary focus of the work that followed. Over a period of 12 months, we led evidence to parliamentary committees on 6 occasions, participated in 32 workshops, and met with stakeholders 241 times. It was agreed that Leon Lowe and I were best placed to spearhead the public promotion of the FMF's constitutional agenda. While that put us at the coalface, it was teamwork. I need to emphasize that saw us succeed. We networked with people across the political spectrum. We made written and oral submissions. We mobilized a business caucus, persuading CEOs to argue the case for property rights. We addressed political parties, but more importantly, lobbied individuals who had the power to sway the discussions. I used to roam the corridors of Parliament, lobbying anyone who would listen, friends from my early days as a participant in the struggle against apartheid. I made impassioned arguments for property rights, something considered heretical by many of them who had been involved in the struggle against apartheid. We met separately with Chief Buthelezi, Cyril Ramaphosa, Naledi Pandor, and Baleka Mbete, became Baleka Khositsile. Ms. Mbete argued against the inclusion of a property rights clause, convinced it would unduly benefit the haves, who were the whites, at the expense of the have-nots, who were the blacks. We explained that many blacks had already acquired property and that many more would acquire property in the future. We explained that the property of these new owners would also be vulnerable to confiscation under a constitution devoid of a property rights clause. The penny dropped. How the penny dropped was that we had said to all these people that we had met individually, who were blacks and from the ANC largely, and the PAC, we said to them, right now it cannot be denied that black people own property. Some of them. The percentage might be much lower than that of whites. And that if one were to look at the elections, say a couple of elections down the line, maybe 4 elections down the line, when there might be a new government, but that might have some better ideas in terms of how to deal with some sectors, some tribal sectors, ethnic sectors, racial sectors, that they might have an axe to grind against. And we said, without the presence of an enshrined constitution, property rights constitution, in South Africa, who knows what might happen? Say an alliance between Zulus and Xhosa, or Zulus and the English-speaking Afrikaners and the other race groups. They might say, look, let's sort out the other groups that are not part of our alliance. It would be easy to confiscate their properties in the absence of a property rights clause. That's how the penny dropped. The FMF objected in writing to several clauses in the draft constitution, but particularly to the inadequate protection of property rights. On July, through attorney Gary Moore, he led evidence representing the Free Market Foundation, evidence in the Constitutional Court on the property rights clause. Gary argued that the absence of a property rights clause did not comply with the constitutional principles, and that black property owners would be as vulnerable to expropriation as whites. In September 1996, the Constitutional Court delivered a unanimous judgment finding the draft constitution was not fully compliant with the constitutional principles. It was sent back to the Assembly for amendments. The second draft submitted in December included a property rights clause. It was certified and President Mandela signed it into law at Sharpeville. Early in 1997, the current constitution came into effect with what we consider to be a strong, if imperfect, property provision. The FMF today continues its fight to protect the right to property so hard won after centuries of dispossession. Before I conclude, I want to explain as to how sometimes we go about demystifying the free market, classical liberalism, especially the free market. And when you go about doing that, first of all, we make people understand that, look, a free market is not something that is designed by any philosophers, by anybody. It is something that occurs naturally, spontaneously. I saw this in 1991 when I was in Moscow to go to witness the ravages of the communist system. And there, first of all, there was only just one McDonald's place. And there were people for blocks, queuing for blocks. And I asked the driver who I had hired, I said, look, this doesn't make sense. That last person in the queue is going to be served 3 years from now. Now, why are they still queuing? This guy said to me, no economy here. Just like that. It sounded like that, no economy here. Anyway, I checked into a hotel, and then the following day, I wanted to see some semblance of informal business sector. And this guy took me to one, and there were a group of people that were selling all sorts of things. There was a woman who was selling from a table Bibles and pornographic material. And then there was a truck that had reversed and stopped there. There was a long queue of people who had been waiting to purchase the bread from there. I can't remember how much a loaf of bread cost in rubles. Let us say, for argument's sake, it was 10 rubles. The following day, I went to the same area. I witnessed something there that really was quite enlightening for those who are locked into some kind of statist ideology. The same guy, the same bread that he was selling, this guy was charging more, and more than the 10 rubles. So I said to him through the offices of my Russian contact, I said to him, please ask him, why is he charging people more than what he was charging them yesterday for the same size of bread? And so he asked him, and this guy was smiling. He said, I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know, why am I doing this? He asked back. So I knew what was happening, because the queue had become longer the following day. So his response was to raise prices. So that's an illustration of how the supply and demand relate to each other in terms of the free market. Now, there is a story that I want to tell you now. It's based on truth, on facts. I'm going to be brief. Sorry, Gail. And this story is that Jean-Baptiste Colbert, who had been charged with the duty of managing trade affairs and the finances during the reign of King Louis XIV. This was in 1630, and he summoned a group of merchants and said to them, what can the state do? The state, of course, embodied by King Louis XIV. What can the state do so that you can produce more food? People are starving. People are hungry. the response from the merchants was, "Laissez nous faire," meaning leave us be, leave us alone. That is what the free market is about. Government should get off the back of the entrepreneurs in the economic arena and allow the entrepreneurs to do what they only know and exclusively do best, that is to generate jobs and to generate wealth. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Our next speaker will tell you more about our Kaalam project. Most of you will have heard about it. But before I introduce him, I would like to acknowledge and thank the Kaalam team members present in the room tonight. Searle and Lorna Sachs, I'm sorry I've lost track of where you are, and Dot Corrigan, who all do extraordinary work. Thank you. Under very difficult circumstances sometimes. Terry Markman is also a board member of the FMF and a long-standing member of its executive committee. He has been closely involved in major Free Market Foundation initiatives and programs, including organizing 2 conferences on privatization and running the Energy Policy Unit. Terry is the Kaalam, and that stands for My Home, Land Reform Project Executive, a project requiring dogged determination. Terry describes his greatest achievements as climbing Kilimanjaro and swimming the Midmar Mile 20 times, and his greatest failure as not succeeding in getting SAA privatized in the 1980s. We haven't given up hope, Terry.
So, in a nutshell, this is what Kaalam is about and how we do it. Number 1, we get funding from sponsors, and without that, we stop. We enter into an MOU with municipalities, which sounds easy, but wow, it's not. Once we've got through the MOU, the people we deal with in the housing are really very pleasant. There are very few unpleasant people that we deal with. We sit down, we agree projects, we sit down, I do it on Teams, and next step is to transfer the titles, and then we have this happy handover event. And Searle and Lorna and I have just come back from Bella Bella. If I had another few minutes, which I don't have, I would have told you all about that. Kaalam was initiated in 2010. My very close friend, Perry Feldman, terrible, it was his idea. We were sitting on his veranda, I think about 29, and he said we must do something. This is ridiculous. It's 5 years ago that I passed away. Anyway, one thing led to another, and after 3 years, we managed to get our first 100 titles done. The handover event took place in 2013, and none other than Ace Magashulu spoke there, and he pointed out there that it was 100 years after the Native Lands Act, which is quite a coincidence. Our first MOU was signed with the Stellenbosch University, Stellenbosch Municipality, and there you see Perry and his wife Veronica signing it with the mayor. And on the back left-hand, back top, this guy with a big smile is Temba Nolutshungu. So the projects range from very easy, which is just doing straight transfers, occasionally verifying things and things like that, to very difficult ones. And the more difficult ones, including upfront work like township planning, town planning, survey, encroachments, and so on. This is an example, and I'm not sure how clear it is, but if you look in some places, you can see red. And those red ones, you'll see the houses are over boundaries. So you've got to go and do the replanning. That's a very complicated one. So it goes, that's the hardest and the highest hanging fruit. The benefits of the ownership, there's big discussions. A lot of my sponsors say that how many jobs does this create? My initial reaction is I don't mind if it doesn't create one job because the security and the pride that it results in is worth it. Owners become bankable, and we know people who have used their houses as collateral. They can get income, and a lot of the income comes from tenants who are renting a room. So there is job creation, but I think my prime purpose is to give people the security. A few pictures. That's a house before the lady received her title, and that's what it looked like afterwards. This was complicated. It was a semi-detached where there were 2 people, the guy on the left and the guy on the right. Both owned those houses. If the guy on the right built on a room. The guy on the left had half of it. Anyway, so we split and now it's a proper semi-detached with two houses. And then there was a CPA, Community Property Association, which is really a socialist idea. And there were 184 residents, and none of them owned the properties, and now they all do. In Parys, Perry was very friendly with Cobus Danhauser. Incidentally, I looked on the list, there's a Danhauser here. Any relation to somebody in... No. Okay. So this farmer in Parys gave all his employees title deeds. There is one of our more recent handovers, and the lady in the red is the lady at the back there, Lorna. This was also in the Free State. Here is the happy people flashing their titles about afterwards, and that really is magnificent, marvelous. And then we get some very pleasant responses and emails and so on. A guy from Standard Bank said, wow, what an amazing experience, highlight of my career, and thank you for helping to change people's lives. There's a Johan Rupert and his wife Gail handing out a title to a lady there, and the mayor on the right-hand side. Archbishop Tutu also congratulated us, the Ruperts and so on. Okay, so we've had our pats on the back, and it's very worth it. This is one of my favourite pictures because there's a little guy there that, who is the grandson of the person receiving the title deed, and he was there receiving it. The guy on the left-hand side is not the grandson, by the way. That's so. When we give out a title deed, we give it out with a little booklet that tells them all about the wills and insurance and so on. And then APSA, who are one of the sponsors, are very, very keen on the education side of things, and they sometimes at the end of a handover will introduce somebody to come and do the education. The big story is as follows. There are 213 municipalities in South Africa, and for those of you not aware, the whole of the country is wall-to-wall municipalities. You will remember Stellenbosch before the old South Africa was a town. Now Stellenbosch includes the surrounding towns, so the municipalities have become bigger. We've signed MOUs with 23 municipalities, 3 of which are metros. We've contacted the remaining 188 local authorities, and I think Dot has been sent, I think must be about a few thousand emails to these people over and over and over again, and occasionally they answer it. This is a picture of where we're operating. In the Western Cape, where by far the biggest number is, there are 25 municipalities there, of which we've done about 13 or 14. We started in the Free State, in Ngwati Parys. We then moved to Makwakwa, and recently to Metsi-Mahala. And if we had 5 hours, Syl Sachs would tell you all about the problems in those places. We've signed an MOU with Gauteng, with Tshwane Gauteng, with Bella Bella, and that's where we had a handover recently. Only in the last week we signed one with Ermelo, Musukale, I can't pronounce it, and Umgeni. And recently the Eastern Cape, the Buffalo City is a metro, and Beyers Naudé, which is the old Graafrenet. Not quite up to date, but that's the progress we've made since 2010. It looks like it's a profitable organisation, if you can believe the bars. So you'll see there 2010 right on the left-hand side, we did the first 100. And Perry and I used to say that, well, we're starting off with a stream, hope that it'll gather into a little river, and we hope one day we'll get a tsunami. We haven't got there yet. Our achievements are that we've done 21,000 transfers to date. If you base each house on 150,000 rand, that translates into 3.1 billion rand that we've got returned, that becomes live capital from debt capital. The oldest recipient was Ellen Chabalala, who was 101, and we've had a number of awards. There's an award on the right-hand side, Perry and his wife Veronica, in the middle, Temba, and his hand around Rhoda Kodali. And there's Lynn and I getting another award last year. Just very briefly, the total story looks like this. There are about, and nobody knows the number, I can guarantee you that, there are between 500,000 and 1.2 million titles still to be given out to the formal sector. But more important and more worrying is the informal settlements, where there are about 2 million titles to be given, 2 million homes, shacks and so on. And the other areas that we're looking at, I won't go into them. So this is an indication of what's happening in some informal settlement areas. People talking about how do you solve the problems. There's some people working in eThekwini, and they say what we can do is we could identify each little shack, give them numbers or any way of recognizing them, and give them a certificate, something like a permission to occupy. The problem is who is going to control that? It's a hell of a problem. Some people suggested the municipality could control it. I said, if you drew up a list, they're the last people I'd ever want to control it. But we're talking about blockchains and things like that and easy titles. So people are looking at it, and I think that that's something that we need to push as much as possible. The reason is that in 5 years' time, that 1.2 million formal houses will have gone down a bit. In 5 years' time, the 2 million informal settlements, housing informal settlements, will have gone up to maybe 2.5. It's ever growing. We've got to stop that. We've got to do something. And then I believe the reason for our success, and I think we have been successful, is the funding. Can't do without it. Project management. I suddenly realized that a lot of the work we do is actually project management, helping them, because the people have got all the wherewithal and they could do it on their own, but they don't do it. So we manage it. We have a team of with the municipalities and the conveyancers. This is my batteries, Johnny. Is that... Okay, I'll go on, I can see. So there's a... perseverance is really important. NISNET, from the first meeting till when we got our MOU signed, took us 7 years, and that was a lovely story. We've networked at a lot of places and met new people, and then you've got people like Herifuri and so on who have helped us. We really don't have much more to say after this, so I think that what I'll just say to you is that we are, I think, winning, but very, very slowly. We do 5,000 or 6,000 titles a year at the moment. All sorts of barriers still in the way, but there are another 1 million still to do. So there's a lot of work to do. And finally, some people think that we are the only people doing this. It's not correct. The municipalities are doing the work, but they sit on it. We recently had a project in Tshwane where we had 9,000 titles that were in boxes, had never been given out. So they have got them, and that's criminal in my mind. And we're doing some in Kroonstad as well. We're doing something along those lines. But there are places, a lot of them in the Western Cape and so on, even PE, which have given out a lot of titles. And what we're tending to do is to help them with the difficult problems. That's upfront work to solve these problems. I think that's enough. Thank you very much.
I attended the first handout of title deeds in Ngwati in 2013. And if anybody has the time and the interest to attend one of these, I can assure you it is a very, very emotional experience. We now move to Martin van Staden, another one of our permanent staff members. He's the FMF's head of policy. A jurist and author, Martin is currently pursuing a doctorate in law at the University of Pretoria, having acquired his Master of Laws with distinction at the same university. He is well connected in classical liberal policy circles in South Africa and abroad. He is widely published in academic journals and the popular press, and he describes himself, humbly I believe, as a history buff. Martin.
I joined the Free Market Foundation as a holiday intern in 2015 and 2016 while I was still doing my bachelor's degree at the University of Pretoria. And I became a full-time legal researcher in 2017. So with perhaps the exception of Jason Urbach and soon Chris Hatting, I was several generations removed from all of my colleagues, and this was by no means a new state of affairs at the Free Market Foundation. The reality then, and I really do regret to inform you, unfortunately, the reality today is that youngsters are not interested in freedom. That rebellious spirit that I think many of us here today associate with youth is gone, and it has been replaced with an overriding desire to be cared for, to be coddled. So finding youth who value these ideas that we stand for of individual liberty, of responsibility, specifically responsibility, free enterprise, property rights, limited government, a government that doesn't just deal in goodies all the time, was therefore quite difficult. But amidst this rough were diamonds who lent, and I'm grateful to say continue to lead, their voices and their expertise to us, to our work today. And I am glad to have played a role, sometimes large, sometimes limited, in bringing Chris Hutton, Impiaki Dlamini, Jock Jonker, Zakele Mtembu, Ayanda Zulu, and many others into roles at the Free Market Foundation. In the case of Jock and Zakes on full-time staff, I could finally say that I was no longer the youngest in the foundation. And with the most recent addition of Ayanda to our team, those days are over for me and my graying head. Others, like associates Mukundi Budeli, Nicholas Woodsmith, and of course our CEO, and I'm not sure how David feels about being classified as youth nowadays, they have, perhaps at the very last moment, allowed the Free Market Foundation to step into the modern era without for even a second losing touch with our values. Chris, now at the Center for Risk Analysis, helped the FMF speak more directly to its followers online, and to this day helps us with quality assurance in the writing that we put out. Mpiaki remains an associate of the FMF and an active participant in liberal and maybe more specifically libertarian discourse, made the FMF more comfortable with the big data projects, and that was something that really helped inspire me personally with the work that I went on to do in the Index of Race Law with the Institute of Race Relations. Jock, my dear friend, is no longer with us, but is remembered in our work as someone who really effortlessly brought his training in both economics and law, which is rare nowadays, to bear on big threats, specifically like expropriation without compensation. Zakele Zakes, our diligent policy officer, makes liberty digestible to the on-the-go audience with his weekly videos, and his insightful deconstruction of what is errantly called competition policy in South Africa, but truly anti-competition policy. Ayanda brings a fresh perspective that does not get stuck in policy detail as any analyst sometimes does, and which I want South African policy analysts increasingly to stop doing, but asks questions about the underlying culture that leads to bad policy, and that is where the real conversation needs to be happening. Nicholas has helped us relaunch the Rational Standard as an alternative media outlet for liberal voices, and keeps the FMF's written advocacy schedule very well stocked. Many other youngsters like Mukundi, who keep our followers updated about what's happening in the courts, or so-called econ bro, someone who has to remain anonymous given the situation he experiences at home in Nigeria, and he effortlessly tears down economic fallacies like the magic money tree discourse, and they make up our extended network, all young. And in this process, I myself, and all of us truly, were allowed to benefit from the wisdom and insight of those who came before. Eustace Davey and Temba Nolutshungu, Rex van Schalkwyk, Gail Day, Terry Markman, and for a very precious time, Leon Lowe. Ladies and gentlemen, I was in the thick of it when the breakup with Leon Lowe happened. It was ugly, it was very, very ugly, and eventually it became a public spectacle. While we at the FMF do not, or at least we do not try to hold grudges, things were done to this organization and said about the people who work in it that unfortunately cannot be taken back. But Leon's work over many years is worth its weight in gold, and the FMF will not only continue to celebrate this legacy, but to advocate it, to promote it in the discourse. Political decentralization, consumer freedom, standing up for the smokers, standing up for the drinkers, standing up for those with sweet tooths. And specifically energy deregulation, policy agnosticism. We can't be picking which energy sources the whole country has to rely on. There's a lesson that the DA just doesn't want to learn, hopefully one day. And classical liberalism as the only viable foundation for public policy in South Africa. And indeed, from the moment I landed here, first as a Kaya Lam intern, and then chiefly associated with the Rule of Law project, my work at the FMF has had one golden thread. I take no pride in saying it, but expropriation without compensation has been that thing. It was at the end of my first year in full-time at the FMF that the ANC resolved effectively to remove the right to compensation from the Constitution. And it was this year, 2025, that started with Cyril Ramaphosa assenting to the Expropriation Act without the government having achieved its constitutional aims. But the objective remains the same. The state wants to rip out from under civil society the certainty that if government chooses to interfere with their property, they will at least receive some reparation for the injury. Now, without that certainty, the regime's power shoots up significantly more than is due in a constitutional state with an unpleasant history of property dispossession. But through it all, right from apartheid to today, the FMF has stood steadfast in favor of strong constitutional protection for private property. And alongside Kaya Lam, I have always believed that our most important work, or at least our most pressing and our most urgent work, is this defense of property rights. Last week, the country was made aware of a property confiscation in Ekurhuleni by the business group Sakeliga, which was hidden from the public discourse since the first steps were taken back in 2019. Since then, the people that we as liberals and as libertarians and as conservatives elected to government to stop doomsday policies like this told us that there have been no property confiscations in South Africa and that we at the FMF and at AfriForum and at Solidarity are fear-mongering. Well, now we know that it is in fact happening and that terrible things are in fact happening to property owners in South Africa. The FMF, I am proud to say, does not believe in waiting for political saviors. And that is why we are in the advanced stages of becoming involved in litigation against EWC. But ladies and gentlemen, not just litigation. We're also thinking deeply, we are a think tank after all, about more fundamental questions about how this country is governed and how South Africans might protect themselves against a harmful, abusive, hostile, and frankly, ladies and gentlemen, enemy state apparatus. The role that the ballot box plays in our salvation, and it does play a role, is ever diminishing. But something constructive has to fill the void, as Dr. Ernst Roots recently said. Thank you, everyone. It is a great honor to speak to you today and to see all of you here joining us on this momentous occasion. I hope the battery issue has been solved. It seems to have been. So we are now going to show a video that covers just some of the Free Market Foundation's work over the last 50 years. So please sit back and enjoy.
The Free Market Foundation is turning 50 years old this year. For half a century, we at the FMF have been making the case for individual liberty, private property rights, free enterprise, and limited constitutional government. I invite you to celebrate this milestone with us and reflect on our legacy of freedom. The FMF was founded in August 1975. The 6 visionary co-founders were Leon Lowe, Ed Emery, Mike Lillard, Fred McCaskill, Andre Spies, and Mark Swanepoel. In its founding announcement, the steering committee explained that the FMF would make the case for a free market economy in Dirigist, South Africa, conducting lectures, courses, and seminars. The FMF has since pursued many avenues to reach and teach South Africans. In the 1980s, over 1 million workers in 2,000 companies were introduced to basic free market concepts through the With Justice for All training course. Developed by Mark Swanepoel and brought to life by people like Dave and Shirley Tate and by Norma James, the course comprised 8 one-hour videos and was available in English, Afrikaans, isiXhosa, isiZulu, and Sesotho.
With Justice for All. In this presentation, we will look at basic economic and business principles. We will see that if we understand and live by these principles, then everybody will be better off.
In the 1990s, FMF consultant Terry Markman established the Liberty School to introduce university students to the fundamentals of liberty, human rights, and the free market. During each 5-day school, students were introduced to thinkers such as Ludwig von Mises, F.A. Hayek, William Hutt, Milton Friedman, James Buchanan, and Ayn Rand, and were exposed to classical liberal ideas in the fields of law, politics, economics, and history. Between 1980 and 2023, the FMF honored almost 40 exceptional individuals for their contributions to the cause of liberty in South and Southern Africa. Award winners include freedom advocates such as Terry Markman, Dr. Sam Mochonyane, who served as the FMF's president from 2002 until 2011, when he became the foundation's honorary life president, a position he held until his death in 2024. Dr. Johann Rupert, whose father, Anton Rupert, alongside Harry Oppenheimer and Dirk Hertzog, supported the FMF in its earliest years. Sir Ketumile Masire, former president of Botswana, Yuri Maltsev, Soviet defector and former economic advisor to Russian President Gorbachev, and businessman Raymond Ackerman. Between 1995 and 2025, the FMF made 277 submissions to Parliament on a wide range of issues. Some highlights include the FMF's 1995 submissions to the Constitutional Assembly, which included sections on the character of the state, the supremacy of the Constitution, direct democracy, the Bill of Rights, affirmative action, separation of powers, private property, and Reserve Bank independence. Our 2012 submissions on the National Development Plan comprised 11 separate comments, and our 2016 submissions to the high-level panel comprised 17 comments. The FMF's catalogue of publications is impressive. For extended periods, our publications program was guided by editors such as Professor Duncan Reiki and Professor Richard Grant. For much of the time, it has been self-guided. The FMF has published briefing papers such as Affirmative Action, Who Wins by Professor Brian Cantor, occasional papers such as Undermining Mineral Rights, An International Comparison by Johan Bierman, monographs such as The Real Digital Divide by Neil Emmerich, and research papers such as Paying for Intervention, How Statutory Intervention Harms South African Healthcare by Jason Erbach. Two series come to mind. First published in 1997 and updated by Gary Moore in 2022, the FMF series Laws Affecting Small Business comprises 8 booklets covering finance, health, justice, labor, land, licensing, schooling, and tax. Each booklet includes recommendations to reduce red tape and free small business from restrictive laws. Our 2024 to 2025 Liberty First series builds on the research contained in the Economic Freedom of the World Annual Index and makes policy proposals for the Government of National Unity in South Africa. The papers deal with freedom to trade internationally, legal system and property rights, regulation, size of government, and sound money. We have published books by Don Caldwell, who died far too young, by Michael O'Dowd, chairman of the FMF from 1975 to 2005, by Temba Sono, then president of the FMF, by Eustace Davey, director from 1981 through to 2024 and currently president of the FMF, and by Martin van Staden, who is currently the FMF's head of policy. For our sister organization, the Law Review Project, Leon Lowe authored Habits of Highly Effective Countries and Principles of Good Law. Terence Davey dragged the FMF kicking and screaming into the 21st century, introducing it to social media platforms and video content. Chris Hutton, with other fresh faces at the FMF, turned our social media engagement into an art form. Today, in collaboration with our digital marketing partner, Sapphire Sky, our in-house team comprising myself, Martin van Staden, and Zakhele Mthembu has substantially raised the foundation's profile. We now have thousands of subscribers and garner tens of thousands of engagements and views. Something to brag about, Elon Musk shared on his platform X an AfriForum documentary featuring Martin van Staden that was viewed 42 million times. Although not the FMF's primary focus, the foundation has been to court on several occasions. On 2 occasions in 1996, Gary Moore led evidence in the Constitutional Court following the FMF's objection to clauses included in and excluded from the draft constitution. In 2016, at Herman Mashaba's behest, the FMF challenged agreements entered into between unions and big business being extended to non-parties. It asked the court to declare unconstitutional the provision that the Minister of Labour must do what private bargaining councils tell her to do. In 2022, the business group Salkelige challenged the validity of the Finance Minister's regulations under the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act. The FMF was amicus curiae, with Martin van Staden liaising with our attorney Pieter Wassenaar and advocate Mark Oppenheimer. The Constitutional Court declared the regulations unlawful, largely as a result of the FMF's ultra vires argument. In 2023, the FMF intervened as a friend of the court in AfriForum's case against Julius Malema in the Supreme Court of Appeal. Our submission was this: whatever the rule regarding hate speech, it must be applied consistently regardless of who is speaking. The FMF has recently applied to appear as amicus in litigation against expropriation without compensation. The FMF sponsors span 50 years and are too numerous to list in full. Whether they donated 200 Rand per month or 25 million Rand, at this time of celebration, we thank them all. Without them, we would not exist or function. To mention just a few, we thank First Rand for sponsoring the Kailam pilot project and the Reinet Foundation and Remgrow for the thousands of lives they have changed since. We thank old and new friends such as the Rising Tide Foundation, the Atlas Network, and the Yorktown Foundation for Freedom for their ongoing support. We thank our annual Million Rand Challenge underwriters for their generosity, as well as the countless individuals who have contributed to that challenge. We also thank Ginger Outdoor for their donation in kind. Through Ginger, the FMF is able to flight creatives on 8 digital billboards around the country, dramatically expanding our reach.
Thank you, Martin. David Ansara, our CEO since January 2023, took the helm at a very difficult time, and he has steered us into calmer, though busy waters. A well-known public speaker and commentator, David is a strong advocate for individual liberty and market-based approaches to public policy. Throughout his career, David has held various positions in think tanks, professional services firms, and trade associations. David is an alumnus of the University of Cape Town, and in 2024, he was narrowly elected as a member of UCT's Council, the university's highest governing body. David is an avid runner, and I must tell you, a besotted new father. David.
In 2022, I watched with concern as the internal strife of the FMF spilled out into the public domain. Here was a highly respected think tank and policy organization with an illustrious track record, seemingly tearing itself apart. And it was with some trepidation that when Gail Day, Martin van Staden, and the late Rex van Skalkwyk approached me later that same year with an offer to take up the reins of the FMF as chief executive. I was admittedly quite conflicted, as Mark revealed earlier in his speech. Could the FMF be restored to its former glory, I asked. Was it a sinking ship? The task was a daunting one, but I've always relished a good challenge. And I could see that the FMF had the basic ingredients for success: a well-known name, ideological clarity, and above all, a community of dedicated people who cared about the organization and who were invested in its future, however uncertain that future may have seemed at the time. Although I am a big believer in free will, I knew that I didn't really have a choice. I couldn't say no. And today it is both humbling and inspiring to lead an organization that has stood firm against statism and collectivism for half a century, and which continues to defend the basic freedoms of all South Africans. And boy, have we been busy. Since I joined the FMF nearly 3 years ago, we have undertaken several significant projects and initiatives. These include the Section 12 campaign, which lobbied for the decriminalization of South Africa's economy and for the decentralization of policing; the Campaign for Home Rule, which promotes federalism as an antidote to the failures of a highly centralized government in Pretoria. The Cape Roadshow with Martin and Joe Emilio was a great example of the FMF taking its message directly to the people. And in the wake of last year's historic general election, the FMF was one of the few organizations that opposed the formation of the Government of National Unity, and we became known for our contrarian proposal of confidence and supply, the so-called no-elition option that was coined by Morne Milan. The formation of the GNU was also an opportunity for the FMF to lay out a comprehensive policy agenda in the form of Liberty First. Built upon the 5 key areas of the Economic Freedom of the World report, Liberty First has formed the bedrock of our research and advocacy. Many long-standing policy issues have continued during my tenure, and Martin has touched on these. The FMF has fought against the national health insurance policy since it was first proposed in 2007. And NHI would effectively nationalize private healthcare in South Africa. Jason Urbach has been mentioned, but I also want to make a special mention of Mike Setas, who deserves our thanks for consistently opposing NHI when most health industry players were too timid to do so. And Martin has also spoken about our years-long fight against expropriation without compensation. The signing of the Expropriation Act in January 2025 was a grave setback for private property rights in this country. However, our resolve to fight hostile policies like NHI and EWC remains undiminished. And we are currently in the process of applying to be friends of the court in litigation against both pieces of legislation. I want to say a few thank yous. I wish to say thank you to, obviously, my colleagues and my fellow board members, the presidents, Temba and Eustace, for their industry and fellowship. Before I joined the FMF, I was a friend of the organization, but I was also somewhat of an outsider. And despite this, I was treated with warmth from my very first day by staff members Glynis, Judith, Zakele, and Monica. So thank you very much for that welcome. And it's not for me to pass judgment on my tenure at the FMF, but without hesitation, I can say that my greatest achievement was convincing first Martin van Staden and then Gail Day to return to the FMF in executive roles. And I owe most of my success to both of them, so thank you. And the fantastic Kai Lum team, which is energetically led by Terry Markman, is interwoven with the FMF's DNA, and it's the perfect expression of our commitment to private property rights for all South Africans. And I'm also grateful to the many spokes of the wheel, who our chair referred to earlier, the Foundation's associates, contractors, contributing writers, and friends. So we might be a bunch of fiercely independent individuals, but when we work together, we prove that the wheel can go very far and over some very rough terrain. A special shout out to Joe and Leanne at Sapphire Sky for dominating our social media and for reimagining and elevating the FMF brand. Some of the beautiful insignia that you see around you was designed by Leanne, so thank you to her. And of course, none of our work would be possible without the generosity of the donors who believe in and invest in our mission. The FMF is not alone in its fight. Unlike many other African countries, South Africa is blessed with a rich array of civil society organizations. And I want to specifically mention two, the Institute of Race Relations, where I was privileged to spend more than 5 years under the leadership of Dr. Frans Cronje, and later John Endres, who joins us here tonight. Thank you, John. And Frans has had the greatest influence on my career and has been a strong supporter of the FMF. I'm also grateful to Piet Leroux, who also joins us, and his colleague Russell Lamberti of Sakeliga, whose pioneering work and state-proofing model has inspired me to think more strategically and boldly about how to effect change here in South Africa. So thank you to Sakeliga. And some of you may have seen our recent high-quality video productions, which were made possible by them. So do check those out on our YouTube channel. I would also like to thank the many advocates of freedom who've contributed to our work and the countless friends and followers who have amplified our message. And speaking of advocates, my friend Mark Oppenheimer was my roommate at university. He was also the best man at my wedding. And now he's a fellow warrior in the battle for liberty through his involvement with the Rule of Law Project. And although we are far from being his highest paying client, he represents us in court as if we were. And I can tell you, if anybody here would like to negotiate lobola with their future in-laws, You should have an advocate by your side to represent you. So thank you, Mark. And a special thanks to my parents for supporting my work. And my mom watches all my videos, and she sometimes comments on them too. And to my wife, Jacqueline, who listens patiently while I plot the destruction of the state over the dinner table. And the arrival of our son 6 months ago has reminded me of why I do the work that I do. So a few words about the future, and I think we must be frank about the situation in this country. There are many threats to liberty, including land confiscation, violent crime, absurdly high levels of taxation, and an overbearing regulatory state. I believe that South Africa is in the midst of a profound change. The global world order is shifting too, and the institutional arrangements established in 1994 are no longer working. That much is clear. But what is less clear is what will replace them. The old is dying, but the new is struggling to be born. The FMF is no ordinary think tank. We are not merely concerned with policy choices, as important as these are. We are also not content to watch from the sidelines as freedom comes under assault. We see ourselves as combatants on the front lines of the battle of ideas. And sometimes that means becoming more assertive, taking unpopular positions, saying what others are too afraid to say. I thought that was just me, but Brian reminded me that that has been the case for many decades and reminded us all today. That's the cost of defending freedom. And that is the cost of independence, and so be it. Remember that this is not a popularity contest. Your inalienable rights to trade, to own property, and to be treated equally before the law are worth defending. We have a long way to go to extend the promise of freedom, but we remain committed to this just cause. However, if we wish to stay relevant, the FMF will also have to adapt its strategy to suit the changing conditions here in South Africa. And whatever South Africa's future may be, we believe, as we have always believed, that people can achieve prosperity and human flourishing if they are set free from unjustified coercion. Other countries have come back from the brink, and so has South Africa. We can do so again. But it will take great courage and fortitude to realize that goal. Yes. And in closing, I want to end with a few lines by the Welsh poet Dylan Thomas. And I quote, "Curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray." There's a musical score to this poem. This is the pregnant pause to create atmosphere. So those lines again. "Curse, bless me now your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." End quote. We will not go gentle into that good night, and we will certainly do our fair share of raging. But come what may, we will keep the light of liberty shining bright for many years to come. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Yeah, I'm just going to steal your time for one more minute. I've been asked to just do a special thanks to one of our biggest contributors at the FMF, who often go unsung, Ginger Outdoor. If you drive on the highway, the N1 here in Gauteng, and soon hopefully in the Western Cape as well, you'll sometimes see FMF branding on billboards as you drive, telling the country about how NHI is health shedding and how EWC threatens our most basic liberties in this country. That has been enabled by Ginger Outdoor, and we really thank them. It's rare for these values to receive that kind of prominence on our roads, and specifically on the N1. So just from our side at the Free Market Foundation, thank you, and we look forward to a great continuing partnership. Thank you.